Hi, I'm Brooke. And this is how I learned what family really means. It started in a hospital room, cold, quiet, full of machines, but what chilled me wasn't the machines. It was my uncle's voice, leaning over my unconscious grandmother and whispering, "Let her die. She's just a burden." And the worst part? Everyone agreed. They nodded. Silently. Like it was reasonable. Like she wasn't someone we all owed our lives to. That night, I stayed quiet. But I remembered every word. And from that moment on, I started writing everything down. You ever wonder what it feels like to be erased by your own family? To have your memories deleted. Your voice questioned. Your love called manipulation? This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what comes after. Would you have done the same? The hallway lights hummed softly when I stepped out of the elevator, my body aching from another 14-hour shift at the care home. Knoxville General always smelled the same, cleaner and coffee, like someone was trying too hard to make sickness feel normal. I stopped by the vending machine for a cup of stale coffee before walking down the ICU corridor toward room 209. Grandma's name, Alma Carter, was taped in small letters on the door. I still couldn't get used to seeing it there. When I pushed the door open, the steady beeping of machines met me. My grandmother lay still under a pale blanket, her silver hair combed neatly as if someone expected company. Her chest rose and fell in slow, rhythmic waves, each breath drawn through a tube taped to her mouth. The monitors flickered green and yellow, blinking like tiny heartbeats. I set my bag on the chair beside her bed and leaned over to fix the blanket that had slipped off her shoulder. "Hey, Grandma," I whispered. My voice came out rough, exhausted. "It's me, Brooke." Her fingers twitched when I touched her hand. Maybe it was reflex, maybe not, but I let myself believe it meant she knew I was there. I'd been here every evening since the stroke. Some nights I stayed until the nurses changed shifts, pretending not to notice when they gently reminded me visiting hours were over. The room felt smaller when family started to trickle in. My Uncle Blaine came first, wearing a crisp suit even though it was nearly 7 p.m. He always dressed like a man on his way to a meeting that might make him richer. Behind him came my cousin Jethro, scrolling on his phone, and Aunt Rosalind, whose perfume hit before her voice did. My father, Gideon, arrived last, quiet, tired, eyes somewhere far behind his glasses. "Brooke," Blaine said, giving me that polite smile people reserve for strangers they pity. "You're still here?" "I come after work," I said. "She shouldn't be alone." He gave a small shrug. "The nurses are professionals. She's well cared for." Rosalind laid a bouquet on the counter and adjusted her jacket. "We were just talking," she said, "about how long this can go on. She's been in this state for weeks. It's difficult." The air tightened. No one looked directly at me. Blaine's tone softened, almost kind. "We all want what's best for Mother, don't we?" I nodded but didn't answer. My father cleared his throat, the sound thin. "We'll see what the doctor says," he murmured. They talked around me, voices polite, detached, like discussing the weather. The words floated: quality of life, financial strain, acceptance. I stood near the window, watching the sun dip behind the parking lot, its orange light staining the blinds. By 8, they settled into quiet conversation. Blaine stood at the foot of the bed, arms folded, the authority of the eldest child resting easily on his shoulders. "She wouldn't want this," he said softly, as if practicing sympathy. "Not machines, not tubes. You all know that." Nobody contradicted him. I wanted to speak, to remind them that Grandma loved life, that she'd once danced barefoot in her garden after it rained. But the words stuck somewhere deep, too fragile to survive their silence. At some point, exhaustion caught me. I sat in the chair by the window, my chin resting on my arm. The rhythm of the monitors lulled me halfway into sleep. I must have drifted only minutes before the words cut through the room like a blade. "Let her die," Blaine whispered. "She's just a burden." For a second, I thought I'd imagined it. Then I saw him lean closer to her, his hand resting near the blanket, his mouth still moving. My heart thudded hard against my ribs. Jethro's phone stopped glowing, he nodded once without looking up. Rosalind crossed her arms, her lips pressed thin. And my father, my quiet father, just stared at the floor. No one said a word to stop him. No one even flinched. I stayed perfectly still, afraid that if I moved, they would see that I'd heard. The room went quiet again except for the hum of machines. My grandmother's heart monitor beeped steadily, indifferent to the betrayal unfolding beside her bed. In that moment, the world tilted. It wasn't only what Blaine had said, it was the agreement in their silence. I'd spent my whole life believing family meant safety, that love was unconditional. Now I knew better. I stared at Blaine's reflection in the window. His face looked calm, certain, like a man making a hard but necessary decision. I felt my stomach twist. If they could talk this way about her, what did that mean for me? I turned my gaze back to Grandma's face. The lines around her eyes looked softer than usual, her skin pale but peaceful. She had once told me, "Brooke, kindness is not weakness. But it will make people mistake you for easy prey." I hadn't understood it then. Now I did. When the family left, their footsteps fading down the hall, I stayed behind. The machines kept time with my heartbeat. I stood and took Grandma's hand, tracing the faint blue veins beneath her skin. "I won't let them," I said quietly. My voice didn't shake this time. "They'll regret thinking I wouldn't fight for you." Her hand twitched again, just once, but it was enough. I sat down, opened the small notebook from my bag, and wrote every word I remembered, Blaine's whisper, the nods, the silence that followed. I underlined one sentence twice, "They agreed." Outside, the city lights blurred through the glass, tiny orbs floating in the dark. Somewhere down the corridor, a nurse laughed. Life went on as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. When I finally stood to leave, I turned back once more. "You're not alone, Grandma," I said. "Not as long as I'm breathing." In that sterile room filled with machines and quiet betrayal, I made a promise I couldn't take back. They didn't know I'd heard. But I remembered every word. They didn't know I'd heard. But I remembered every word. I stayed long enough to watch their cars pull out of the parking lot, one by one, before I gathered my things. The hallway outside the ICU was quiet, just the soft shuffle of nurses finishing charts. I walked to the vending machine again, but the coffee tasted like metal. It was past 9 when I stepped out into the parking lot. The Tennessee night was warm, heavy with the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. As I crossed the lot, I saw Jethro standing near his truck, tapping quickly on his phone. The blue glow from the screen lit up his face, and when Blaine's sedan rolled by, Jethro gave a small nod in its direction. They didn't see me watching. He slid his phone into his pocket and drove off without looking back. That small gesture, just a nod, told me more than any conversation ever could. I drove home in silence, my headlights catching the wet sheen of the asphalt. The city felt different, like it was holding its breath. My apartment building sat in a quiet part of East Knoxville, not far from the hospital. I parked, locked the car, and climbed the stairs to the second floor. Inside, the air smelled faintly of detergent. I dropped my keys on the counter and slipped off my shoes. For a few minutes I just stood there, the low hum of my refrigerator filling the room. Then my phone buzzed. It was Marceline. We weren't close, never had been, but she was one of the few relatives who treated me like I wasn't invisible. "Hey," I texted, "is there something going on with Blaine and Jethro?" She didn't respond right away. When she did, it was cautious. "Why do you ask?" "Just a feeling," I wrote. "Something about tonight felt staged." The typing bubbles appeared, then disappeared. A minute later, a screenshot popped up. The top of it read, "Family Core Decisions." The list of names was long: Blaine, Rosalind, Jethro, even my father. My own name was missing. I scrolled down the messages. Blaine, "We'll meet tomorrow, no need to include Brooke. Too emotional. She's just the nurse, not a decision maker." Rosalind replied, "Exactly. She doesn't understand the financial side. It's better she stays focused on her little caretaker duties." There it was, in plain text, the verdict they'd already passed on me. I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. A cold rush spread through my chest, like the world had gone sideways. Marceline sent one last text, "Don't tell them I showed you. Please." I typed back, "Don't worry. I won't." Then I turned the phone face down on the table. The apartment was too quiet. I opened the curtains and looked out at the parking lot below. The streetlights painted everything a dull orange. No one looked up. I made myself a cup of tea, though it tasted like cardboard. The messages kept replaying in my head, too emotional, just the nurse. They weren't just cutting me out, they were rewriting who I was. Another ping. A new message from Rosalind. It was a voice note this time. I hesitated before pressing play. Her voice, smooth and clipped as ever, filled the room. She's only hanging around Alma for the house. Everyone sees it. Poor thing doesn't have much else going on. My hand tightened around the phone. I replayed it once more, just to be sure I'd heard right. Then I forwarded it to my email. Evidence. I sat back on the couch, trying to steady my breathing. The hurt didn't feel sharp, it was slow, deliberate, like rust eating through metal. I thought about Grandma's house, the white porch swing, the smell of tomatoes growing by the fence. Every summer I helped her plant them, her laughter spilling over the hum of cicadas. "You've got your mother's patience," she used to say. Now that same patience was being twisted into a weapon against me. They said I was clinging for inheritance. They had no idea the only thing I wanted was to keep the last piece of her alive. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed softly in the dark. For a moment, I didn't know what I was doing, just that I needed to move, to act. My fingers clicked through folders until I found one labeled Family. Inside were photos, Grandma and me on her porch, me holding her hand at the hospital last Christmas, snapshots no one else had bothered to take. I created a new folder. Named it Family Evidence. Then I started saving things, screenshots, audio files, messages, names. Every piece of truth they'd tried to bury. Around 11, the rain finally came. It drummed against the window, steady and relentless. I turned off the lights and sat in the glow of the laptop screen. The storm outside mirrored the one building inside me, loud, but contained. I thought about calling my father, asking him why he hadn't said anything when Blaine spoke. But I already knew the answer. My father had spent his life under his brother's shadow, mistaking obedience for peace. He wouldn't break that pattern now. So I whispered into the empty room, "You're not alone, Grandma. I'm still here." My phone buzzed again. Another message in the group thread Marceline had sent earlier. A new one from Blaine this time, meeting tomorrow morning at 9. Final decisions. Final decisions. The words burned. I stared at them, then opened a blank note on my phone and began to type. Dates, times, what each person said at the hospital, who nodded. My hand shook a little, but not from fear, something colder, steadier. They thought keeping me out meant keeping me powerless. But I've spent years listening, quietly taking care of people no one else wanted to deal with. You learn a lot when people forget you're in the room. I closed the laptop, turned off the light, and sat in the dark for a moment longer. The rain slowed to a whisper outside. They had their secrets. I would have mine. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the streets outside my apartment streaked with silvery reflections from passing cars. I sat curled up on the couch with my second cup of coffee, not for the caffeine but for something to hold. The kind of stillness that follows a storm wasn't peace, it was the silence where bruises showed. I'd barely slept, my mind still tracing the lines of that group chat and the voice note that followed it. But today, I didn't let the weight of their words settle on me the same way. Not after reading those messages over and over. Something had hardened. Something clear. I got up, opened my closet, and pulled out the old storage box tucked in the back behind winter scarves I hadn't worn in years. Inside was a smaller container, weathered, its corners taped from wear, my mother's digital backups. She'd saved everything on flash drives, carefully labeled, Alma's house, Brooke's birthdays, family events. She might have been disrespected by them, but she never let them take her memories. I plugged one of the drives into my laptop and started clicking through folders. Within minutes, I found it, a folder labeled, Carter Family, Raw. I opened the photos, half expecting the screen to freeze. And there we were. There I was. Me and my mother standing on the back porch of Grandma's house, both of us laughing while trying to balance a tray of lemonade. The sun was behind us. The light hit her hair just right, making her look softer than I remembered. Alma was in the background, holding a gardening hose. She wasn't smiling. Another picture, my 11th birthday. Balloons, a cake with pink frosting, and me grinning with a mouth full of braces. Aurelia, my mom, holding a grocery store cake with her name scratched out and "Love You, Brooke" written over it in her messy handwriting. I remembered that day. We'd gotten there late, after Mom's car broke down, and Grandma had already started slicing someone else's pie. I scrolled through the images, my stomach tightening with every click. These were real. These were mine. I opened a browser and found the link to the family tribute album Jethro had posted the night before. A public Google Drive, slickly arranged, with slide transitions and background music. I braced myself and clicked. There were dozens of photos. Alma in her wedding dress. Blaine holding her hand at his daughter's graduation. Rosalind, smiling beside Grandma in her garden. But no sign of Aurelia. None. And none of me. The space where we had existed was cleanly edited out, as if someone had taken a scalpel to our history and carved us out like rot. One picture caught my eye. It was from that same 11th birthday. The decorations were identical, the setting familiar. But my mother was gone. Cropped out. And I? I wasn't even in the frame. In her place stood Rosalind, perfectly framed beside the cake. I shut the laptop. My hands trembled, not from sadness, but from the sheer audacity. It's one thing to forget. It's another to pretend we never existed. The sound of my phone vibrating broke the silence. It was Marceline. I figured you'd see the album, she said without greeting. They said I might overreact, I answered. I guess rewriting people out of their own lives doesn't count as an overreaction. She exhaled. They're saying it was about aesthetics. Clean lines. You know how Jethro is with presentation. Sure. Must have been hard trying to keep the lies looking symmetrical. There was a pause. Brooke, I know it doesn't make it better, but I don't think your dad knew. He barely checks his email. That hurt more than if she'd said he helped with the edits. After we hung up, I grabbed a notebook from the drawer and sat at my kitchen table. I started writing dates, names, things that were said, moments that were buried. I wrote everything I could remember about my mother. The birthday parties she threw on her waitress salary. The way she ironed my school uniforms late at night. How she refused to raise her voice in Grandma's house, no matter how many times she was ignored. And I remembered that night years ago, overhearing my father whisper to Blaine in the hallway, "You know Mother never accepted her." I didn't understand it then. But now, as I traced the lines of that memory, I realized it had always been a warning. I was born on probation in this family. Allowed to be present, but never truly invited. I opened the voice recorder on my phone and searched through saved voicemails. There, near the bottom, was one from Mom. Dated a few days before she passed. Hey baby. Just checking in. You don't have to be what they think. You're more than the silence they left us in. Keep going. Keep being you. I pressed the phone to my chest. For the first time in years, I cried. Not because she was gone. Not even because they had erased her. But because I had let myself believe maybe one day they'd see her differently. But they never did. And they wouldn't. I wiped my face, stood up, and opened my laptop again. The glow of the screen felt steadier this time. I uploaded a dozen photos, unedited, raw, time-stamped. I gave them clear labels: Aurelia Carter, Brooke's mother. Brooke's 11th birthday, unedited. Back porch 2003, full frame. Then I went back to the flash drive and opened another folder. Inside was a draft email, unsent, addressed to me. If anything happens, protect Brooke. This family forgets too easily. I stared at it, my heart thudding. She knew. She always knew. I whispered aloud, like a promise, not this time. They thought deleting us meant erasing the truth. But I remember everything. The following morning, sunlight barely made it through my blinds. It wasn't bright, it was pale, hesitant, like it wasn't sure if the day should begin at all. I sat at the table with my laptop open, still staring at the photos I'd uploaded the night before. They felt like armor now. Proof that I had existed. That my mother had existed. That we weren't ghosts. When my phone buzzed, I expected another meaningless group notification from work. But it was Marceline. The message preview read, "Brooke, I think you should hear this before it spreads further." Something cold settled in my stomach. I opened the file she'd sent, a short audio clip. The timestamp was from 2 nights ago, the same night I'd been with Grandma. My own voice came through first, quiet but recognizable. "You don't have to fight anymore. Let go." Then silence, followed by a faint mechanical beep. At first, I didn't understand what I was hearing. Then it hit me. I'd said those words to comfort Grandma when she was struggling to breathe, when the machines had made her wince. But in this recording, my tone sounded wrong. Detached. Manipulative. The pauses between my sentences had been edited, rearranged. Someone had turned a moment of compassion into cruelty. I froze, staring at the screen. My heart didn't race this time, it simply dropped lower, into a depth I didn't know existed. I could picture Blaine's face while he played this for everyone, feigning concern. You see? She's unstable. She's making things worse for Mother. Who sent this around? I texted Marceline. She answered within seconds. Blaine. Said it was proof you're not thinking clearly. Proof. That word made my throat tighten. I leaned back, closing my eyes, trying to remember every detail of that night, the way the machines hummed, how Grandma's hand trembled when I held it. I hadn't known anyone was recording. Anger came slowly. First disbelief, then disgust. I played the clip again, listening for the cut in the sound. There it was, a small, sharp click where something had been trimmed. Someone had taken a private moment and turned it into ammunition. I stood up, walked to the window, and pressed my palm against the glass. The city outside looked normal, ordinary, almost mocking. How many times had I told myself Blaine wouldn't go that far? That some part of him still had decency? That part of me was gone now. Before I could think further, my phone rang again. A number I didn't recognize. Miss Carter, a voice said. This is Clara from Knox Bank. I'm calling to verify a few charges on your account. I don't have an account with you, I said automatically. According to our records, you opened a card 6 months ago through our Lakeside branch. It appears to be past due. I gripped the counter. I didn't open anything. What address is listed? There was a pause, papers rustling. 1 Lakeview Drive. That's a business address, actually. A real estate office. Blaine's office. I felt something between nausea and fury. My voice came out low. Can you send me the application file? Certainly, ma'am. It includes voice authorization, so we'll attach the recording. An hour later, I listened to that second recording. A woman's voice, young, nervous, pretending to be me. The caller read my name, my social security number, my birthday. She even used the same phrasing I did when spelling it out. But it wasn't me. It was Vera. My cousin. I could almost see the scene, a family dinner, me leaving my purse on the counter for 2 minutes, Vera laughing as she poured another glass of wine, slipping my card into her phone for a picture. And now, here I was, thousands of dollars in debt for something I never touched. I printed everything. The emails, the recordings, the bank notice. I stacked them on the kitchen table, one layer after another, until the pile looked heavier than it should have been. My phone chimed again. New messages from the family group thread, the one I wasn't supposed to be in but still had screenshots of. Rosalind, she's spiraling. Jethro, now she's claiming identity theft. Blaine, let's be ready. She's volatile. The hospital may ask questions. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. It wasn't fear now, it was something tighter, sharper, like wire wrapped around my chest. I turned off the phone and sat down. The quiet felt dense, like air before a thunderstorm. I pulled my old notebook toward me, the same one where I'd written Blaine's words weeks ago. I flipped to a clean page and wrote one line, if they want to see volatile, I'll show them measured fury. I spent the rest of the day sorting through what I had. Photos. Messages. Audio files. Paper trails. Each piece went into a new folder on my desktop labeled insurance. I wasn't sure if I meant it as protection or threat, maybe both. By nightfall, the apartment was dark except for the glow of the computer screen. My tea had gone cold hours ago. I replayed that edited clip again, forcing myself to listen to it from start to finish. I studied the rhythm of the breaths, the artificial silence between words. I imagined the smugness of whoever had cut it together. They thought I'd crumble under humiliation. They didn't understand that shame stops working once you stop believing it's yours to carry. I opened my email, typed a new message, and addressed it directly to Blaine. My fingers didn't hesitate. I know what you're doing. I know about the recording, the card, and the lies you've planted. If you continue, I'll make sure everyone else does too. I reread the lines twice, hit send, and watched the small notification pop up, delivered. No reply came that night. Not from Blaine, not from anyone. But I saw the read receipt appear. They'd seen it. They knew I wasn't pretending anymore. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, steady and low. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to no one in particular, you wanted proof I could fight? Fine. Here it comes. I gave them one warning. Just one. The email sat in my sent folder like a loaded gun on a kitchen table. I didn't sleep much that night, not from fear, but from clarity. The kind that arrives when you've finally stopped hoping for someone to do the right thing and decide instead that you'll have to force them. 2 days later, Blaine called a family meeting at the local community center. He positioned it as a memorial planning session, but I knew better. The minute I walked into the room, the air was already sour with false pleasantries. The folding chairs were arranged in a neat circle, as if that might disguise the fact we'd all brought weapons. Rosalind smiled at me in that way people do when they're about to publicly humiliate you. "Oh good, Brooke, you made it." Jethro plugged his laptop into the TV mounted on the wall. "We thought we'd kick this off with a few special memories." I sat down and kept my face neutral. I knew better than to blink too early. The screen lit up, and grainy footage filled the frame. It was me, 23 years old, behind a bar in downtown Knoxville, laughing while pouring shots and dancing to the music. I remembered the night clearly. I was paying off Mom's hospital bills at the time. But I knew what they were trying to make it look like. Rosalind leaned forward slightly. "We just thought everyone should know who's trying to act like Mother Teresa lately." The chuckles were low but there. It wasn't about the video, it was about control. They wanted to own the version of me that everyone believed. "That's the best you've got?" I said calmly. "A 10-year-old video of a woman working 2 jobs to keep her mother from dying in debt." Jethro muttered, "You always twist everything." "No," I said. "I just refuse to let you do it first." Before anyone could respond, Blaine stood. "Let's move on. We've set up a fundraiser. Rosalind, if you'll do the honors." She handed out printed flyers, each with a link to a GoFundMe page titled, "Help Us Honor Alma's Final Days." I scanned the page on my phone. There was a photo of Grandma, sedated, pale, tubes in her mouth. And the description? It was written like I had authored it. "We're overwhelmed with emotion," it read. "Brooke Carter and our family thank you for supporting Alma's final journey." Money was already coming in. Hundreds of dollars. I stared at them. I didn't write this. I didn't approve this. And I want it taken down, now. Rosalind shrugged. "You should be flattered. We thought it might seem more heartfelt coming from you. You used her body, without consent. And mine." I folded the flyer slowly. "You turned pain into a business plan." Blaine spoke up, voice low and tight. "You're being emotional again. Think carefully before this goes too far." I looked him in the eye. "I already did. The moment you used her image and signed my name underneath it? That's when I stopped being afraid of you." Nobody moved. The room sat in uncomfortable silence. I stood, gathered my things, and walked out without another word. Back at home, I filed an official takedown request for the fundraiser. I reported identity theft, misrepresentation, and unauthorized use of medical imagery. Then I posted a short, pointed message to my Facebook page. "That's not my voice. That's not my fundraiser. But it tells you exactly whose hands are dirty." I turned off my phone and sat in the dark. Let them panic. The next morning, Dr. Sharma called. "I heard about the fundraiser. I also heard you've been removed from some decision-making conversations." "Temporarily," I said. "You want to come by this afternoon? I'd like to make something clear in your records." That afternoon, I walked into the hospital with every document I had. Dr. Sharma met me in his office, looked me square in the eye, and said, "Whatever else is going on, no one here doubts who has been the most consistent advocate for Alma Carter." He drafted a statement, that I had never once requested withdrawal of care. That I had remained emotionally stable throughout. That my prior mental health struggles were not relevant to my current role. Before I left, I asked, "Will this hold up if they try to challenge me?" He didn't blink. "Yes. And I'll say it under oath if it comes to that." By the time I got home, the GoFundMe was down. Rosalind had posted a vague apology online, something about misunderstandings. But the damage had been done, and not to me. I forwarded Dr. Sharma's statement to my lawyer, along with a short message, "We may need to file soon." I didn't want to sue. I didn't want to tear down what little family I had left. But I also knew this wasn't about wanting war. It was about surviving one. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, brushing my hair back into a ponytail. My reflection didn't look stronger or angrier or braver. It just looked ready. I stopped being afraid. That's when they got desperate. 2 mornings after I shut down their fundraiser and walked out of that memorial meeting, I opened my front door to find a thick envelope on my doormat. It wasn't mailed, it had been hand-delivered. No return address. My name printed in all caps across the front. I knew it was from Blaine before I even touched it. Inside was a single letter from his attorney, neatly typed and cold in tone. Legal jargon coded the words, but the message was clear. They were petitioning to have me removed from any medical decision-making for Grandma based on a history of emotional instability and prior mental health treatment. Attached was a printed therapy record, 7 years old, detailing my sessions after my mother's death. Notes about grief counseling, insomnia, adjustment issues. I remembered every hour of those sessions. I'd worked through that darkness to keep functioning, to keep showing up for Grandma. And now they'd weaponized it. There was something deeply violating about seeing your pain repackaged as a liability. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands, not because I was afraid, but because I was so tired of people using my love for that woman against me. I didn't cry. Instead, I drove straight to the hospital. The air outside was crisp but carried the scent of coming rain. As I parked, I saw Blaine's car already in the lot. Of course he'd be here, probably trying to push his narrative before I could speak. When I checked in at the front desk, the nurse hesitated. "There's a temporary hold on your access," she said gently, eyes darting to the screen. "Someone submitted a formal review request." I kept my voice calm. "Call Dr. Sharma. Tell him I'm here." 5 minutes later, I was sitting in a small, windowless conference room with Dr. Sharma and the hospital ethics liaison. A manila folder lay on the table between us. I could see the corner of the therapy note sticking out. Dr. Sharma looked tired, but his voice was steady. "Brooke, I want you to understand something. These kinds of reviews happen more often than people think. It doesn't mean we assume anything. Except you locked me out before you asked me a single question." The ethics liaison, a woman named Angela, shifted uncomfortably. "It's hospital policy. We had to act on the petition until we could investigate. It's not a judgment, just procedure." "That's easy to say when you're not the one being erased," I replied. Dr. Sharma gave a short nod. "Understood. But we're here now. If you have anything to submit, we're ready to listen." I reached into my bag and pulled out a flash drive. "Play the audio file labeled ICU meeting. It's unedited. Timestamps are included." Angela plugged it in, and we listened in silence. Blaine's voice came through first, low and deliberate. "Let her die. She's just a burden." Then Jethro chiming in with a grunt of agreement. Rosalind's quiet, complicit silence. My father's murmured, "She wouldn't want this," followed by more nods than words. The room was still when the clip ended. Angela didn't look up from her notes. "Is this from your phone?" "Yes. Recorded that night. Before I even knew they'd try to claim I was unstable." Dr. Sharma tapped the pen against the folder, then said softly, "In 30 years of working in medicine, I've never heard a family so eager to erase someone who's still breathing." I swallowed. "They're not grieving. They're negotiating." He closed the folder without reading another word and looked at Angela. "Clear her access. Reinstate full rights of contact and communication. I'll sign off on it personally." Angela nodded, already reaching for her tablet. I leaned forward. "One more thing. I want a written statement from the hospital confirming that my mental health history has no bearing on my legal standing or medical decision-making capacity. I want it in writing, on file and signed." Dr. Sharma didn't hesitate. "You'll have it before the end of the day." By the time I left the room, Blaine was standing near the elevator, scrolling through his phone. He looked up and saw me walking out, badge reinstated, papers in hand. He straightened his shoulders, tried to look surprised. "I heard you were trying to stir things up again." I didn't stop walking, but I did say, "You used my grief to try to take my power. But grief taught me how to fight. You picked the wrong wound." His face flushed red, but he didn't speak. Maybe he finally realized he'd underestimated what it meant to push someone who had already lost more than he ever could. Marceline met me in the lobby a few minutes later. She handed me a coffee and said, "You warned him." I did. "You could have just let them fall apart on their own," she said quietly. I shook my head. "They're not falling apart. They're sharpening knives. I'm just making sure mine is sharper." That evening, I emailed the hospital's signed confirmation to my attorney. Then I sat in the kitchen, opened a fresh notebook, and labeled the first page, false claims/legal retaliation. The war they started was no longer just a family issue. It was a matter of truth and survival. They wanted to erase me. Now they'd have to outlive the truth. 3 days after the hospital cleared me and formally reinstated my decision-making authority, I got the call at 5:12 a.m. It was Nurse Kayla. "Miss Carter," she said, her voice tense. "You need to come in. Right now." I was already halfway into jeans before she finished the sentence. "What's going on?" I asked as I shoved my phone between my shoulder and ear. "Alma's vitals dropped suddenly around 4:30. No clear cause. She's stabilized for now, but you'll want to see this yourself." By the time I pulled into the parking lot, the sun hadn't fully risen. I entered through the side staff entrance Kayla had told me to use. "Less attention this way," she'd said, and I hadn't asked questions. She met me in the hallway outside Grandma's room. Her usual tight ponytail looked a little disheveled. "I'm going to show you something. You didn't get it from me." We walked into the staff break room. She pulled a tablet from her bag, glanced around, then swiped through a few files until she stopped at a chart. "This was added last night." She turned the screen to face me. It was a medication record. One I hadn't seen before. I scanned the list, something called midazolam, in a dosage that made no sense for a patient in my grandmother's condition. "This wasn't approved," I whispered. Kayla shook her head. "It wasn't ordered by Dr. Sharma. It was submitted as a family-authorized supplement, flagged for palliative consideration." My eyes narrowed. "And the name?" She sighed and tapped another screen. "Request submitted by Blaine Milburn." There it was, in black and white. "This isn't just unethical," I said, voice low. "It's criminal." Kayla looked away. "You didn't hear it from me. But you need to do something. Before it's too late." When I entered Grandma's room, the machines beeped in their usual rhythm, but something felt wrong. Her breathing was shallow, slower than it should have been. I sat beside her, took her hand, and just listened. For hours, I stayed there. Shift changes came and went. Dr. Sharma checked in briefly, noted the new dosage, and confirmed my concern without saying much. He said he'd review the documentation. I knew what that meant. Bureaucratic speak for, I need to cover myself first. Night fell, and I refused to leave. At 11:47 p.m., something changed. Her hand twitched. Then her fingers gripped mine, barely, but it was there. The monitor beeped faster. I leaned forward. "Grandma?" Her eyes fluttered. "Grandma, it's me. Brooke." Another twitch. Then she blinked. Just once. My breath caught in my throat. And then she whispered, ragged, hoarse, almost inaudible. "Brooke." It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't reflex. She said my name. The nurses rushed in as I called out. Kayla led the charge. They checked vitals, adjusted oxygen levels, paged Dr. Sharma. I stood back and watched the flurry, but I couldn't move. My feet felt cemented to the floor. She said my name. For the first time since this nightmare began, she recognized me. And in that moment, everything I had fought to protect, her dignity, her wishes, her life, rose to the surface. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't overreacting. I was the only one who had been listening. An hour later, after they'd stabilized her and dimmed the lights again, Blaine showed up. Of course he did. He walked in, hands in his pockets like he owned the room. "I heard her vitals spiked," he said, trying to sound clinical. "Any changes?" She opened her eyes, I said flatly. And she spoke. Blaine smirked. "Lucidity's not the same as clarity. It could be a reflex. You know that." She said my name, I replied, stepping forward. "Not yours." His face twitched, just slightly. Enough to tell me he wasn't ready for that. "You're making this into something it's not," he said. I looked him dead in the eye. "She knows who I am. Do you?" He opened his mouth to speak, then stopped. I walked out, leaving him in the doorway, just another shadow in the hall. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with hospital risk management. Tampering with medication. Unauthorized orders. Attempted medical manipulation. I didn't go public. Not yet. But the report triggered something. A review. Questions. Quiet side glances in the hall. Staff whispering when Blaine passed by. His credibility began to erode, not with shouts, but with silence. He'd been so sure no one would ever look too closely. That's where men like him always go wrong. By the end of the week, I received a notice. Blaine was no longer permitted to submit any treatment requests. All care decisions had been returned to me. Dr. Sharma met me in the hallway that afternoon. "She's stronger than any of us gave her credit for," he said. "She always has been," I replied. He paused, then added, "And so are you." That night, I returned to Grandma's room. She was asleep, peaceful, but her grip tightened slightly when I took her hand again. I leaned in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You're safe. I promise." She spoke. I listened. And now, the world would too. It didn't take long. After Grandma whispered my name, after the machine steadied and the staff started talking about possible recovery, Blaine must have realized the tide had turned. Because 3 days later, I got a call from the hospital's admin office. Not a nurse. Not a doctor. But someone from PR. "Your uncle has requested a formal family resolution meeting," the woman said. "He wants everyone present, including Dr. Sharma and hospital administration." A pause, then she added, "He's calling it a discussion to unify care decisions." I let her finish. Then I said, "Tell him I'll be there. And that I'm bringing documentation." The meeting was scheduled for the following Friday, in a small conference room just down the hall from the ICU. It was the same one where families usually gathered to discuss hospice options or end-of-life planning. How fitting. When I walked in, the room was already full. Jethro sat with a notepad, flipping through pages like he had anything meaningful to say. Rosalind, in her usual pearls and stiff smile, barely looked up. Blaine stood at the head of the table, arms folded, trying to look composed. Dr. Sharma sat near the end, his face unreadable. I greeted no one. Instead, I set my laptop on the table and plugged it into the overhead screen. The room went still. "This won't take long," I said. Blaine opened his mouth, but I spoke over him. "What you're about to hear is from the ICU. The night you all stood over a woman not even dead yet and decided she didn't deserve to live." Click. The audio began to play. My voice came first, soft, tired, speaking gently to Grandma. Then, Blaine's unmistakable tone. "Let her die. She's just a burden." A gasp. I didn't turn to see who it came from. Jethro leaned forward. "That's taken out of." "It's not edited," I snapped. "It's timestamped, unaltered, and backed up in 3 places. Try me." The room went quiet again. Rosalind stood abruptly and stormed out, heels clacking like a ticking clock. Dr. Sharma remained silent, then slowly stood. He opened a folder and pulled out a piece of paper. "I was asked to write a summary of care advocacy," he began. "As the attending physician, I've interacted with all involved parties. What I observed is as follows." He glanced at me before reading aloud. "Brooke Carter is the sole individual in this family who exhibited consistent advocacy for the patient's life and autonomy. She has shown unwavering presence, clear understanding of medical information, and emotional steadiness during crisis points." Dr. Sharma looked directly at Blaine. "Your influence ends here." Blaine didn't speak. For once, he couldn't. When the meeting adjourned, I didn't wait around. I gathered my things and left, head high. The truth had finally echoed through a room that once only heard what Blaine wanted it to. Later that evening, I sat at my kitchen table. The house was quiet. I opened Facebook, clicked Create Post, and uploaded the same audio clip, no caption. Just the file. I didn't watch the notifications at first. But within an hour, the post had been shared dozens of times. Comments poured in. A local news blog picked it up, calling it "The Granddaughter Who Fought Alone." 2 hours later, Marceline texted me. "Blaine's church board called an emergency meeting. He's been asked to step back from his leadership roles, indefinitely." I read it 3 times, then closed my phone. I didn't feel joy. Just air, cleaner somehow. The next morning, I received an email from the hospital, subject line, "Update, Advance Directive Change." I opened it slowly. The attached file was a scanned copy of a signed form. Alma's new directive. Medical power of attorney assigned exclusively to me. Blaine's name removed entirely. No announcement. No confrontation. Just legal proof that everything had shifted. I printed it, slid it into a folder labeled Final Control, and placed it beside the rest of my documentation. Marceline came by that afternoon. She brought takeout and didn't say much. We ate on the floor like we used to when we were kids, quiet, but side by side. "You did it," she said finally. "No," I corrected. "She did. She remembered. And that's what matters." After she left, I stood by the window for a while, watching as dusk settled over the neighborhood. Porch lights flickered on, one by one. I didn't need revenge. I needed them to hear the truth. And they did. The next 2 weeks passed like the closing credits of a long, silent film. The calls stopped. The meetings faded. Even the tension, once thick enough to suffocate, had thinned into an uneasy quiet. I spent most of those days at home, surrounded by unread emails and unopened envelopes, some apologies, others barely veiled threats posing as concern. I didn't delete anything. I didn't reply either. The truth had already spoken for me. I often found myself sitting in the kitchen after dark, the same way I did when my mother passed. Same mug. Same seat. But this time, I wasn't grieving in confusion, I was settling into clarity. The night after the hospital granted me full authority over Grandma's care, I stood by the window and whispered something I hadn't said in years. "I'm not afraid anymore." It didn't echo. It didn't need to. 3 days later, I heard a knock on my door. When I opened it, there stood Nurse Kayla, her expression softer than usual. She held out a small, folded cloth bundle. "She wanted you to have this," she said, placing it in my hand. "Said she asked me to keep it safe until she could talk again." I nodded slowly and thanked her, heart in my throat. After she left, I sat at my table and carefully unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a thin, faded bracelet, plastic beads spelling my name, Brooke, in uneven letters. I had made it when I was 7, with glue on my fingers and a crooked smile on my face. Grandma had worn it for years, tucked under her watchband like a hidden secret between us. Tucked underneath the bracelet was a small note in shaky handwriting. She remembered. Even when they tried to forget you. You never left her. I stared at those words until the page blurred. Then I let the tears come, not the angry kind, not the ones laced with injustice or betrayal. Just quiet, full tears of something I hadn't felt in a long time, being seen. That weekend, I visited Grandma in the hospital garden. The staff had wheeled her out for some fresh air, and she sat wrapped in a quilt, eyes open, soft and watchful. I walked over without speaking, pulled a chair next to hers, and placed the bracelet gently in her lap. She looked down, then reached out with trembling fingers to hold my hand. "You never left me," she whispered. I nodded, unable to speak, and held her hand tighter. The wind moved through the garden, rustling the leaves like pages being turned in a book we hadn't finished. We didn't say much more. We didn't need to. A few days later, I ran into Blaine in the hospital parking lot. He was standing by his car, talking into his phone. When he saw me, he froze mid-sentence. I didn't change direction. I didn't flinch. He didn't say a word. Just stared. I walked right past him, calm and steady, without a glance back. Later that night, Marceline came by with a folder in her hand. "You still thinking about suing him?" she asked. I looked at the folder, then shook my head. No. What they lost is bigger than anything I could take from them in court. She didn't argue. Just nodded and said, "Then let's get you something better to hold on to." We spent the evening sifting through old boxes, my mom's journals, Grandma's recipes, notes I'd written as a child. I began organizing them into a new folder on my laptop titled, Letters I Wish I Sent. Not to hurt. Not to shame. But to remember. I started writing, not just my version of things, but theirs too. The good, the hard, the parts that made me. The stories no one else would tell. Because sometimes survival isn't about fighting harder. It's about refusing to disappear. One of the last entries I typed was just a single sentence. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers back, "I'm still here." I didn't win. I remembered. And that was enough. Sometimes, the deepest betrayals don't come from strangers, they come from the people who were supposed to protect us. But when truth is all you have left, it becomes the most powerful thing you can stand on. Have you ever been silenced by your own family? Or felt like the only one holding on to what's right? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful real-life stories like